to Boris? Hi, this episode of Bill Whittle Now is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle. And Bill, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who was a good buddy of President Trump's and led the Brexit effort, which is kind of bogged down these days, but is the leader of the Conservative Party in Britain, has announced this week what he calls a green industrial revolution. It sounds very similar in some ways to the American Democrats' New Green Deal. Among other things, by 2030, he hopes to have a ban on new petrol or diesel cars, and then he wants to spend some $16 billion. I'm translating it into American money, which is real money. $16 billion
real money.
To advance nuclear, hydrogen, and wind power. He hopes to have every home in Britain being able to be powered by offshore wind farms by 2030. Bill, and all of this coming from a conservative. By the way, the complaint of the Labour Party is, of course, that that Boris is late and not enough. Yeah, exactly. What do you think of all this from a conservative?
I'm not going to give it to you from a conservative point of view. I'm going to give it to you from a scientific point of view.
No, I mean, Boris is a conservative.
Yeah, well, he's conservative by European standards. And I'm happy he's there. I'm going to give this to you from a scientific point of view. Currently, renewable energy accounts for about 1 or 2% of our total national energy consumption. And if we were to go full on, all out into renewables, we might be able to get to 10 or 15%. Which is less than 100% for those of you not familiar with how numbers work. What is also important to understand about things like existing solar and wind turbine farms is that because they're unreliable, and they're by nature unreliable, you don't get solar power at night. And on cloudy days, rare though they may be in the Nevada desert, you don't get it then either. And sometimes the wind isn't blowing. And the wind is constantly changing, so the amount of power you're generating is constantly changing. And so each one of these so-called green renewable energy plants have fossil fuel burning backup plants to go online for when these things go down or don't produce enough electricity. And those plants are dirtier than the plants that are built on a large scale to burn natural gas or oil or whatever the case may be. So the numbers are not there. There is one energy source that is available to us today that could get us to a zero carbon future, and that is nuclear power. And that's all.
And Boris's plan provides funding for nuclear as well, and hydrogen.
Well, good luck with that, Boris, because if you think that it's tough to keep fossil fuel petrol cars on the road, wait till you start building nuclear power plants. Now, I want to deal with nuclear for a second, since that's what what this episode is essentially about. Nuclear is the only energy source that will get us there. When people talk about hydrogen-powered cars, zero emissions, wow, it's fantastic. Where do we get the hydrogen from? Well, we have to make it. Really? How do we make it? Well, we just basically pass electric current through water. We get hydrogen and oxygen. How much of an electric current do you have to pass? A significant amount. To get the hydrogen to run the cars? Yes. So the clean burning hydrogen in the cars runs through the result of electrical process. That's right. Yes. So how do the electrical plants burn? Well, we burn coal generally. So your clean burning hydrogen car, your clean burning electric car is essentially a coal powered car if that's where you generate your electricity. So to say that hydrogen is the answer is not an answer. That hydrogen I never get these two things correct. One is an energy source and one is a fuel. And I think hydrogen is a fuel. But in any event, the numbers aren't there, and they can do whatever they want to. They can make whatever claims they want to. But the one thing that I can tell you with assurance, with 100% mathematical, scientific assurance, is that if these targets are met in terms of 2030 or whatever, no new petroleum cars, those energy needs cannot be met with green energy as it exists today. In fact, they cannot be met with green energy, period. If you are excluding nuclear, then that's it. So you can have a green future with 15% of the energy, 20% of the energy we're making now. That's extremely optimistic, by the way. Or you can have a carbon-free future, but that is going to depend on nuclear reactors, which are not, by the way, I might mention, the nuclear reactors that have had so many problems. Let me just stop myself right there. There have been 3 major nuclear accidents in the history of this planet. One of them was 3 Mile Island, where some radioactive gas was emitted and no harm was done to anybody near as I can tell. Chernobyl was a catastrophe, but that's what happens when you have a Communist Party official determining reactor levels and you build a reactor without a containment. And then there was the Fujiyama accident, which was caused Thank you. Fukushima accident, which was caused by a 9.1 earthquake in Japan, and the structure was built to design to withstand 9.0. 9.0 earthquakes are once every 200 years. So to say that this has been a failure is to completely misstate the case. Chernobyl was the most dangerous reactor design available, and even that only blew up because the 3 other reactors still working there right now. So what the point I'm trying to make is that all of these reactors were designed essentially in the 50s and 60s, using essentially physics that was done in the 40s. And there are reactor designs now. Let me just say one last thing about this, and we'll move on. Currently, existing nuclear reactor designs, as I said, are from the 50s and 60s, and the mechanisms necessary to prevent a meltdown or a catastrophic failure are mechanical systems. In other words, emergency pumps that come in, or in Japan, the emergency pumps failed because they were underwater because of the tsunami. Modern reactor designs don't depend on mechanisms or engineering systems to shut down in the case of failure. They shut down in the case of failure on their own. They fail safe. They are fail safe systems. They have to be maintained with electricity. If the electricity goes out, the reaction stops. So the reactors of today are nothing like the reactors of 50 years, 60 years ago. And those reactors have a remarkable safety record on top of it. So they're going to have to decide whether they want a carbon-free future or a nuclear-free future or an energy-free future. They're going to have to pick one of those.
Well, Bill, when you suggest that green energy solutions could never get us to the kinds of goals that Boris Johnson is suggesting here, based on from what we know today, I wonder if somebody, the guy who was the head of the firewood industry group in the 1800s could have said the same thing about petroleum. So, petroleum will never be a substantial source of energy as we know it today. That's why we need to keep buying firewood and planting more trees to chop them down to burn.
Beautiful example. Let's deal with that example. I love examples like this because now we get to apply common sense and logic. So I'm the firewood robber king. I'm the lord of firewood and energy production throughout the United States. Actually, we don't even have to have this discussion because this exact same situation happened in the early 1900s when the switch was made from coal to oil. So let's deal with that because that's a historical example. I don't have to speculate. At the turn of the 20th century into the early 1900s and up until about certainly into the 1920s, battleships ran on coal, which is why when you see these World War I battleships, it's nothing but a black smear to the horizon. And all of them ran on coal. The entire battleship, steamship navy of the entire planet was coal-based, and there were coaling stations, coal refueling stations scattered around the world for people to shove more of this stuff in there. So now I'm the coal baron, and I say everything runs on coal. Coal is the essence of the energy structure of the early 1900s. You're absolutely correct. Now, along comes the oil guy. As Brian Regan would say, the oil guy is the the cranberry guy of energy sources. He's got oil in everything. Yes. So oil guy comes along and he says, I think you would be better off switching to oil, to which we'll take the British Admiralty. The British Admiralty says, we have hundreds of battleships that run on coal. Why on earth would we want to do the expense and the magnitude of this kind of switch? Because the oil guy then says, well, first of all, it's more energy dense. Secondly, you don't have to shovel it. You can pump it. You can store it in liquid containers. You can crank it into the ship through a hose. There comes a point when the benefits are so enormous that you have to be willing to take the incredible hit of switching all of those ships from coal to oil. And that's what they did. And more importantly, going forward, from that point forward, the designs that they built were oil burning designs. So it is possible to overturn the existing energy structure if you have a better product. So far, so good, Scott. But the problem is that nothing on the table is a better product, with the exception of nuclear. Nothing comes close. That's like saying to the guys who are building 1920 battleships, instead of saying convert to oil because it's better, you should go back to sail. Because we like sail.
This is because of the same thing. You remember the movie Tucker, about the Tucker automobile and essentially how Big Automotive in Detroit shut down or tried to block Tucker from manufacturing his car and were ultimately successful in doing that, except for 50 particular prototypes that he was able to crank out. So the left, I think, would make the argument and say, well, yeah, Bill, the reason why nothing is at that level yet is because the petroleum, the oil industry has shut down research and development on that, has blocked the kinds of regulations or incentives or subsidies that the federal government could provide to advance these so that they can really become a reliable and large-scale energy source.
Again, you present me with a concrete example. How wonderful of you. So Tucker's, first of all, the story of Tucker was a dramatized story, but I admire guys like Tucker. I admire him very much. I admire Howard Hughes, and he was barking mad. But I admire him because he had a vision. He decided to try and do things. Some things were tremendously successful, other things not. But you got to admire a guy who's trying to break the paradigm. So let's take Tucker as an example. Tucker did not design a car that ran on flubber. Tucker didn't have a design for an automobile that got 400 miles to the gallon on a gallon of sunlight. He didn't build a car that was running on unicorn juice. He had safety designs that he thought were important that the other people in the industry didn't want to implement because they thought it was too expensive. But that's not the same thing as saying that Tucker had this amazing source of energy. They do this with Tesla all the time too. They do this with Tesla. Tesla made some interesting experiments with static electricity, and Tesla was a great, brilliant mind, and Tesla was badly abused by Thomas Edison.
By Tesla, you mean Nikola Tesla?
I mean the actual Tesla. Yes, Nikola Tesla. And he was a brilliant guy, and he was badly abused by Edison, and all of that is true. But the idea that Tesla had developed a means of infinite energy that we've simply suppressed is just plain ridiculous. It's ridiculous. People have learned their lessons in many degrees. And by the way, the reason you can tell it's ridiculous, Scott, the reason you can tell that the idea that I've got a paradigm-changing technology and it's just being suppressed, here's your evidence that that is not true. Because the guy that designed this thing originally went to IBM and said, we have a design for a personal computer. And the guy at IBM said there wouldn't be a need for more than 100 or 1,000 computers, personal computers in the entire country. So instead of this thing being subverted and buried and disappearing from history, these guys realized, no, we got a really good idea. So they went into their garage and they started Apple Computer, and the rest is history. It is now probably surpassed by Amazon now, but at one time was the most financially successful company in history. It had more money than any other corporation in the world or the history of the world. Because this idea, not just the app, but the entire idea was so good that Steve Jobs knew that that he didn't have to take a knee to IBM. And this idea that I've got a car that runs on water, there are people out there claiming that water is a fuel. News to me, I'm drinking water all day. If you drink nothing but water, you don't gain any weight. You know why? There's no calories in water. And you know what that means? That means there's no energy in water either, at least not in terms of something we can extract without going into quantum levels. So let's just not deal with that. The bottom line answer to Boris Johnson's statement is this. This is political pandering, and he knows it. He's the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He's fully aware of what the energy requirements needed are and what they will be. And I suspect he's doing the exact same thing that everybody else has been doing with climate change, which is kicking it down the road. In 2005, Al Gore said we had 10 years to save the planet, or that was it. Well, that was 5 years ago, so here we still are. And the New York Times said that by 2015, New York's going to be underneath a foot of water, and here we still are. So what he's doing is he's appeasing the lunatic base that understands nothing. And more than that, it's not just that these greenies don't understand the science. That would be understandable. They don't want to understand the science. They don't want to understand it. They don't want to hear these arguments. They will not listen to them. They have a religious, fanatical belief that if you put up enough windmills, you'll be able to run everything you want without any energy consequences or any carbon emissions or any of that stuff. But it's just not true. And when it comes down to when the rubber meets the road here, speaking of Mr. Goodyear, when the rubber meets the road here, people are going to realize that they have a choice between a green energy future or spending most of their time in darkness. That is what is going to be the result if this policy, if it continues in Great Britain or the United States. That is where it's going to end up. And when people realize that there is no magical technology, they're going to choose to live with a clean burning carbon future like natural gas. The United States is the only country that ever was invited to the Paris Accords to exceed its carbon reduction. Only country in the world to do it was the one country that pulled out of it because of Donald Trump and because natural gas is the cleanest burning fuel there is. And I live in LA. I got here in 1988, and on a summer day, you couldn't see 3 blocks. I am not exaggerating when I tell you I was in Los Angeles for 3 weeks before it cleared enough for me to say, my God, this is a valley. There are mountains out there. Not far either. And so all of these buses were belching out this black diesel smoke. And then all of a sudden, the buses in Los Angeles used to say running on clean burning natural gas. And then they put the vapor recovery systems into the fuel thing. And now those days are gone. There is no air pollution in California, in Los Angeles. Nothing like what it used to be. A bad day in the summer is often better than a good day before. And so what am I saying here? Well, what I'm saying is that back in the 1980s and 90s, when pollution, actual pollution, not carbon pollution, was a problem, we went to clean burning natural gas and it cleaned up the air. And now natural gas is the enemy because it burns clean. And because capitalism can continue to thrive under that. This isn't about energy, and it never has been. Because if it was, we'd be having a rational discussion instead of this one.
Thank you to the members of BillWhittle.com for making this program possible. You can join them by clicking the link in the description below. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.